Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Retro Ups and Downs. Now, we are having so much fun doing this already, and I kind of love how this is timed up, because I would love to tell you that we planned in advance that we would be doing Encounter at Farpoint the week of the anniversary. But actually, it's just a happy accident the way that Strange New Worlds fell. So, happy anniversary, Encounter at Farpoint. It is absolutely terrifying to think that it's been a few years since it aired. It is 38 years since Encounter at Farpoint debuted, and I am only 37. So yeah, I missed it by just a couple of months. So, and it genuinely bugs me. It bugs me that I am just that little bit younger than the next generation. Also, I'm probably on record as saying that Encounter at Farpoint is one of my least favorite episodes of Star Trek, and possibly my least favorite pilot of them all. Is that going to be the case today? Are the downs going to far outnumber the ups? I suppose we should probably find out. If you would kindly join me, we head to all of the ups and downs for Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 1, Encounter at Farpoint. We're coming through with an up for that OG title sequence. There's two main title sequences that The Next Generation goes through in its 7-year run. One that was just there for seasons 1 and 2, and one that is actually just there for episode 1, which is this one, where they don't have the character names in the title sequence. They do have the actors, but they don't have the title names, which I had forgotten until I rewatched this time around. But this is effectively a remake of the original series opening sequence, and that was quite a deliberate decision. I know Robert Justman really pushed for this as well. And of course, you have the reuse of not only Alexander Courage's opening notes from the original series, but also Jerry Goldsmith's theme from the motion picture. And I wanted to highlight this now instead of waiting for temporal observations, because I watched Star Trek out of order as a child. So I vividly remember when I watched the motion picture for the first time being very confused how they were using the Next Generation theme 10 years beforehand. I was not the smartest child in the box. Fun fact about this episode: as we're getting that glorious pan down of the Enterprise D, you get your guest starring. We learn Q's name before we learn Picard's, and I just think that's fun. This whole sequence though, as we get the Enterprise D descending down so that we then, as you know, the audience viewpoint, go up over the saucer section and see Picard walking toward the window, that is an up. It is a beautiful, beautiful shot. And you're probably going to hear me talk about the beautiful shots of Encounter at Farpoint a lot, because someone who didn't slack off in any way while making these episodes were Industrial Light and Magic. Our captain's log takes us to Deneb 4, where we know there's going to be, well, quite frankly, an encounter at a station called Farpoint. It's clues in the name, really, isn't it? Basically, we're going to walk through the ship and we get the engineering set. And engineering for The Next Generation is just an up. I mean, it has become something like the archetypal engineering set for Star Trek, I think. I know, like, you had the original Enterprise there before, but there's something about the blue. It's just become so baked into the franchise, hasn't it? As the credits keep going, he's like, you know, Seán, you're still talking about the credits, like, but there's a lot to cover. It is co-written by D.C. Fontana and Gene Roddenberry. Well, to say that there was a little bit of oomph when it came to writing this episode. I'll do this really quickly. Long story short, the original pilot was not the full feature-length episode that we ended up getting. There are several different accounts as to what exactly happened, but I think most agree that all of the Q stuff was input by Gene Roddenberry. So DC Fontana, Dorothy Fontana, looked after all of the Farpoint stuff, and the Q stuff was sort of slid in afterwards to pad out the length. The fun fact being, of course, this gives us John Delancey. We absolutely love Q, fantastic character. But that is not to say that there wasn't a lot of headbutting over who got credit for writing this episode. If you haven't yet, you simply must watch Chaos on the Bridge, which is an account and a sort of a warts and all account of what went on, particularly in the first 2 seasons of The Next Generation. I implore you to watch that if you haven't had a chance already. We get sort of rapidly introduced to each of our new characters. I mean, at this stage, you know them at this stage. You know Picard, you know Data, you know Troi, you know Yar. So I'm not gonna spend too much time going through them. We do get our sort of, here's Data, who is definitely going to be our Spock character. I mean, let's not even pretend he was ever intended to be anything else. He was going to be our Spock character who didn't perhaps understand emotion or interaction on a human level, at least not initially. In a similar vein to Spock, we get this discussion of Snoop, Sneak, Gumshoe. I quite liked, I mean, so much of this episode is on the nose, right? It's a pilot. In a way, again, perhaps forgive my nostalgia glasses, but in a way it's getting a little bit of a pass for some stuff. But one thing it's not getting a pass for is down. I am sensing a powerful mind. Oh, season 1 Deanna Troi. Yeah. Let's just say they really took a while to get Troi right. Like several seasons in. There is no character of Troi in this episode. There is the plot along that is called Troi. The plot along means, okay, we need to understand how a feeling is happening. We need to understand if something is real. Plot along, plot along, plot along. The only thing really where they lay some sort of, ground for potentially next week and the week after is, of course, the interaction with Riker. But, it's rough. It's rough. I have no problem with the space cheerleader outfit because I would wear the crap out of that if I thought I would get away with it. But Troi's rough in this episode, I'm not going to lie to you. She is, of course, detecting the arrival of, well, what we will learn to be Q. We're first seeing this massive force field in space, and over what seems like about 25 minutes, the ship comes to all stop and Worf raises the shields and phasers down. Can you imagine if this was the Borg? You would have all been destroyed within seconds. I'm going to take this opportunity just to do a general up for Industrial Light and Magic. So they came in and did the effects for Encounter at Farpoint. They did all of the filming of the Enterprise D model. They created Q, for example. They created the creatures that we meet later on. So much footage was created for Encounter Farpoint that effectively just gets reused over and over again for a lot of the rest of the season. And kind of no complaints. Like, they did a fantastic job. The Enterprise D looks gorgeous in this episode. Andy Probert's design really, really shines. I mean, you know the Enterprise D, it's a big floating town in space. It was quite different. Same general configuration, saucer nacelles of what we'd seen before, but this was an Enterprise for a new age. It was very 80s. I've watched Next Generation several times at this point, but actually I've only watched The Golden Girls once, and I can absolutely imagine at some point Picard going out to the lanai. That's kind of what I imagine is on the Enterprise D, because it was of a time. Absolutely love the design of the Enterprise, love the way it's filmed, love the way it's depicted. So as it comes to a stop in front of that big giant force field, gorgeous. Yeah. 100%. Enter John Delancey as Q. Of course he's getting it up. This is probably the least likable Q ever is in his run in The Next Generation, because he starts to kind of almost immediately, they start to introduce humor after this. He next appears in Hyde and Q, and okay, Q who? That's a different kettle of fish altogether. But that's not to say I don't like him. First appearing, thou art notified, because again, in theory, this is the first time we're ever seeing this character. This could just be how they speak. And then you get him as that sort of general from the 50s. He's talking about fighting the commies. One of the very few appearances of a cigarette in Star Trek as well. It's a bit weird, I'm not gonna lie to you. Picard calling out, when we used to wear costumes like that. Yeah, it's a hell of an introduction. We also get the blasting of Torres. No, not that one. But yes, Torres stands up with his Type 1 phaser in hand. It was set to stun. And actually, in fairness to Q, Picard goes, it was set to stun, he would not have injured you. And he says, knowing humans as thou dost, wouldst thou be captured by them helplessly? Yeah, do you know what? Up. Fair point, Q. We get a funny thing here, actually, because last week, when I was commenting on the man trap, I said there was a captain's log that was recorded, where obviously Kirk had knowledge of what was happening, but we didn't know when the log was being recorded. We have the exact same thing here. So now I feel like a bit of a spoon, like maybe this is in every flipping episode. But yes, Picard says we have, we now have to deal with this being called Q. Well, he's hardly recording that as he's talking to Q. So yeah, I just thought it was funny that these two episodes, one after the other, had that same little trick. We get the first instance of humanity being called a dangerous, savage child race. Something that has, of course, aged very well in the 38 years since this episode aired. Something that hasn't really aged very well is some of Yar's characterizations. It seems like there was lines included in the script which were there for our benefit as an audience to let us know what people's roles are. But, Yar goes from 0 to 100. Sir, as security chief, I cannot simply stand here. Down. There was surely a more organic way of introducing that. We get a kind of a fun set of sequences then where Worf, who they were obviously still trying to figure out how to light Worf, because in this scene he's like basically only lit from here, where Picard says, right, we're going to shut down any internal ship comms. We're only going to have printouts, which has got to be one of the very few times that we get printouts in the Next Generation. And he starts to inquire about what's the theory about separating the ship at warp. And so he sends Worf down to engineering to let the engineers know that they're going to try this. And clearly this was a scene added just to get another shot of the engineering. Do you know what, like, fair. I do remember hearing a rumor a long time ago that Gene specifically included scenes in engineering so that they could build an engineering set. In other words, otherwise they weren't going to. Now, do fact check me on that one. Because I kind of would love if that was true, if I'm honest. Also, one thing I like about this scene is that Picard refers to Deanna as Commander Troi. She is, of course, a lieutenant commander. Because she doesn't wear a standard Starfleet uniform for most of the Next Generation's run up until season 6, people kind of forget about her rank. It becomes very important in episodes like Disaster. But yeah, she's a lieutenant commander. Like, it's quite good that she's addressed by rank, quite frankly. We get then the extended sequence of Q chasing the Enterprise D, and honestly, this is padding for time. So we're getting the saucer separation sequence. You have Worf being given command of the saucer section. Picard is going to head down to the battle bridge. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but maybe this is something that doesn't benefit from future knowledge. Q's omnipotent. Like, Q could be like that on the bridge if he wanted to be. So clearly Q is playing with them. I say clearly because was Gene aware of this while writing the script? Perhaps, perhaps not. We get our saucer separation sequence. We also get taken absolute up. O'Brien, lovely to see you there. Colin Meaney, you fine Irishman. Doesn't get a name in this episode, but we all know. We all know. We also get one thing that I want to shout out, because as we're seeing shots of all the families and other crew on board the ship trying to get to where they're going, come through, Scant, take it up. I love that the Scant has gone through such a resurgence in the last few years, because quite frankly, it's nice to have a bit of a breeze down there. Their plan now is to try and distract this creature while they separate the ship. So what they do is they're going to fire some torpedoes, and it looks like Yar fires all of the torpedoes. All of them. Like that is more than a spread of torpedoes, do you know what I mean? Then the sequence begins. So I want to say up to the actual saucer separation sequence. It's gorgeous. It's really well done. I love how, it separates, for want of a better word. I'm gonna give a down to playing the Next Generation theme tune during this scene. For me, it was just a little bit too far into the camp of cheese. I will, though, say that the drive section, as it pans around to go back and face Q, that is a gorgeous shot. Take another up for me there now. They kept talking about how Q was right on their tail. He was at warp 9.8, but it seems to take flipping ages to arrive. Down. Have a bit of consistency with your warp scales. We then have a very awkward shutting down of Yar as well. You know, again, as I say, the characterization of Yar is quite odd in this episode. Clearly, they wanted to create a strong, frankly, quite volatile, but definitely confident female character here on the bridge. I just don't think there was the right kind of balance. So Yar will say something and Picard will just kind of slap her down. We'll see this a lot with Worf as the Next Generation goes on, because Worf sort of slides into that role. But it's a bit much in this first episode. It is a down for me. We get the first good use, if you like, of Troi's power here when they are transported to the courtroom. And Troi is able to say, "This is real." That at least is a handy use of the power so far. And then, of course, enter one of the most iconic images in certainly Star Trek The Next Generation, Judge Q. It is really hard not to notice that he's clearly sitting on a forklift, but like, it's good fun. And again, I like how they play this scene. There's some bits that don't make an awful lot of sense to me. Like, you know, you have Yar again, seems like she's gonna kind of start something now. They gave her a second, you know. God, she has no chill at all. But also, they talk about how in 2036, no human, the law came through that no human could ever basically stand trial for the crimes of their forebears or their race. But then Q counters with, yes, but this is actually 2079, at which time that law didn't exist. So why are Data and Troi there? Troi, as we will learn as the episode goes on, is half human. So it's a stretch that she's on trial. There's absolutely no reason why Data should be on trial. I don't think that was a major concern. I think really, even though humanity is the one on trial, Picard is the focus here. Then, however, we do get a really awkward scene again, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but Yar. You know, Yar saying, you know, you should get down on your knees and, you know, say thank you to Starfleet for being what we are. And quite frankly, I would have frozen her too. It was an awkward thing to say, and it didn't really make any sense. Q does relent though and defrosts Yar by agreeing, well, not agreeing. Picard reckons he's calling Q's bluff. Picard reckons that Q is starting to worry he will lose this trial if he follows the rules. Q is less concerned about that. Q does make a point of saying that this will be a fair trial, absolutely. But then we also get references to Shakespeare, such as kill all the lawyers, which led to the phrase guilty until proven innocent. And then, quite quickly, Q orders that his guards hold guns to the rest of the crew's heads if Picard says anything other than guilty. Fair me arse, Q. Picard pleads guilty, provisionally, which, quite frankly, was a bit of a risk. He literally said if you say anything other than guilty, you don't know he's not going to pull the trigger. We get Data then to effectively play back what Picard and Q said to each other, which is our first example of Data being able to perfectly mimic people's voices. Oh, that'll become important. Patrick Stewart is clearly playing this scene as though he is still in the RSC, playing for the back seats. It is something about Picard that was eased out as the show went on. He is, well, very, very Shakespearean in his delivery here, but that is because it's week one and he was a Shakespearean actor who didn't have as much TV experience. It is not to forget, of course, his memorable turn in Dune from 1984, which I actually only recently watched, and it was a lot of fun. He implores Q to test humanity as it currently is, to see if it is still guilty of the crimes Q believes it to be guilty of. And Q basically says, yeah, all right, okay, talk to you after Farpoint. And back on the battle bridge they are. And we get something of it becomes a gag 7 years later. O'Brien clearly hasn't noticed the fact that they've all suddenly stood up out of their seats. From his point of view, he reckons that they were on their way to Farpoint and that's where they were always heading. It is something that they will play off as we get to All Good Things. At Deneb 4, we meet Commander Riker. A personnel log by Commander Riker, new first officer of the Enterprise D, reveals that he's just been dropped off by the USS Hood. We get that gorgeous shot of Farpoint Station, and then we get, no, where's his beard? Down! Don't scare me like that. Oh, He speaks to Groppler Zorn about this amazing station that the Bandi have managed to build, and Zorn offers him a snack, and he says, if you had an apple, oh, okay, never mind. And then suddenly there's a bowl of apples there. So he's got to replicate it then. Riker says something like, oh, I could have sworn that wasn't there. And Zorn counters with, did your failure to notice it before make it unwelcome? Nice comeback. Genuinely, nice comeback. Riker leaves and Zorn makes a point of saying to seemingly no one, if you do that again, we will punish you. We then get a really weird introduction to Dr. Crusher and Wesley, where Riker meets them and maybe Crusher doesn't fling her arms around Riker, but then Wesley seems to be like, oh, if you think that my mother's just unfriendly, she's not, she's just shy around new people. And she doesn't turn around and belt him, and he should be absolutely grand for that one. Take it down, Wesley. Wesley Crusher, I mean, we know, reevaluation, but there are some things in the first season that are the reason people struggle with Wesley Crusher as much as they do. Another example then of seemingly replicators working on this place is when she's looking at a bolt of fabric and says, wouldn't it be nice if there was gold in it? Suddenly there's gold in it. Again, they're in the 24th century. This isn't that unusual. But she says, charge this to Dr. Crusher when my ship arrives. How on earth does money work in the 24th century? It's so inconsistent. However, this does tie in with what Riker was trying to tell her about Groppler Zorn, and I like that. Crusher says, I was on the point of accusing you of inventing work to impress your captain, and I apologize. I like that. I kind of see that there's already a bit of a comfort there, despite Wesley's best efforts. Where there is no comfort, and where I'm given a whopping down, is how Riker speaks to Geordi. Enter LeVar Burton. Geordi comes up to deliver a report to Riker, says, is this an official report? All right, yeah, calm down, mate. LeVar was just telling you the Enterprise was arriving. Sick? Riker beams up to the Enterprise D, Yar meets him in the transport room, and off they go to the battle bridge. And then we get the first meeting between Picard and Riker. Picard is sort of quite aloof, not exactly overwhelmingly welcoming. He does literally say, welcome aboard, but he is clearly in the middle of something. And you kind of forget about this type of interaction when, again, you see how Picard and Riker become later on. I do have it down. We effectively get a clip show within this episode as they bring Riker up to speed, and then we watch the scenes we've literally just watched again. So that was, again, a sort of padding for time. We get what appears to be one of, if not the only appearance of the ready room for the battle bridge here. Picard assigns Riker the manual docking of the Enterprise saucer and drive sections. It's purely just to test the man. There's no need for it whatsoever. Even Data's like, manual? Okay. And on this topic as well, down. It's all padding for time. All of this is just padding for time. And it's quite obviously so. Like, for example, everyone's big, lovely smiles when Riker doesn't smash the ship into each other, only for Picard to say, yeah, routine. We'd seen the separation. We didn't need to see it rejoining. We then move things from the battle bridge to the observation lounge up on the saucer section. So here's our first experience of this room, which I love. I mean, it's hard not to love the observation lounge. And we get this sort of more candid speak between Picard and Riker. And it's pretty quickly revealed that Picard was, like, he wasn't being rude for rude's sake. He was sort of testing Riker a little bit, and Riker pushes back. They talk about how in his previous post, Riker refused to let Captain De Soto beam down to Altair 3, lest he could put the captain in danger. And Riker just makes it very clear, I will follow your orders short of compromising your safety. And I like it. You know, you really get the feeling of these two men. Picard then says, you know, seeing as we're speaking this way, will you do me a favor? Make sure I don't make an ass of myself. And you're kind of go, what? And he says, yeah, this is a ship with families on it. I'm not a family man. Well, that's gonna age badly, innit, Jean-Luc? Welcome to the Enterprise, Commander Riker. Overall, that's an up from me. We get a little bit of exposition about Geordi's visor quickly after that. And you know what? It's up. It was a little bit like, okie dokie, this is a little bit forced, but hey, it's very interesting about how Geordi sees. And also, like to make sure that we know that at this point in time, he doesn't have an option to get the bionic eyes that he will get later on, and even the ones that are suggested by Soren in Generations. Also, look closely, I'm sure some people knew this already, but sickbay had not yet been built. That's a redress of the observation lounge. We then get my favorite scene of the episode. Riker arrives on the bridge, meets Worf, and asks specifically for Data. Worf informs him that Data is bringing an admiral via shuttlecraft over to the hood. Well, why can't he just beam? Well, he could, but the admiral is a remarkable individual. What's so damn fascinating about not having died? Up. DeForest Kelley is perfect. Perfect in this episode. Now hold on, boy. I don't see any points on them ears, boy, but you sure do sound like a Vulcan. It's really hard not to get emotional watching this scene, honest to God, because clear and utter passing of the torch from one to another, the McCoy with the Data, obviously Spock character, and then just that final bit of, well, she's a new ship, but she's got the right name. Treat her like a lady, she'll always bring you home. Don't think this is any shock to anyone. Latin them up. The Excelsior class USS Hood flies away then after this, and we get a little kind of a nod from Q, who appears on the view screen, and Worf pulls out his phaser. Picard says no, beginning a long tradition of saying no to Worf. It's all very strange, really. Mr. Worf, do you intend to blast a hole in the view screen? You reacted fast, but futilely. That word's going to come back, isn't it, Jean-Luc? I will learn to do better. It's all very awkward. Sake. Q gives them 24 hours to figure out what's going on Deneb 4 and what the test is and everything. Picard's like, right, if we're going to be damned, let's be damned for what we are. 11 hours later. I'd love to know what happened in that 11 hours. Like, what did they do in that time? Because everything else seems to take place in the next 20 minutes. Did they just kind of sit around being like, just gonna make sure we move in. We get a shot in Picard's ready room. We see the Stargazer, although we don't know what it's called yet. It's called the Stargazer. We also see the fish tank for Livingston the fish. Riker is giving Picard a briefing on Deneb 4 and how a lot of the materials used to build Farpoint Station are not naturally found on the planet. So, how did that happen then? Curiouser and curiouser. They walk out of the ready room and then Riker and Troi encounter each other in this episode for the first time. Picard is like, Riker, this is Troi, Troi, this is Riker. He doesn't know they're having a full chat via their minds because they've met each other long before this. And we'll meet each other many times again after this because, oh well, we know, don't we? I love the way this scene is called back to in All Good Things as well. But we're not talking about that episode. It is probably the beginning of what has to be the most uncomfortable turbolift journey ever. Well, Picard is standing back there and Riker and Troi are clearly looking at each other like, it's all just a little bit awkward, isn't it? They go down to the planet to meet with Groppler Zorn, and Zorn is straight in with a bit of racism going, I'm curious why you would bring a Betazoid here. Screw you, Zorn. Racist. You know, she does then say, I'm only half Betazoid. Okay, well, good so that we know anyway. We then get something that, because of foreknowledge, is one of the funniest scenes in the episode. Well, if Starfleet can't help us out, we might have to go somewhere else like the Ferengi. Because they were meant to be the big bad of the next generation, which is so funny when you think about where we get to with the Ferengi. I'm just gonna let them have this moment. Good old scary Ferengi. Yep, terrifying, hopped up gerbils. Oh, then, God bless Troi. I'm sensing pain, despair, ennui, mild gastroenteritis. They got there in the end. Yeah. Anyway, she picks up that someone or something is not very happy on this planet. Maybe could have taken another pass when it came to doing Troi's character. There's also a funny thing. As they're leaving, Picard says, well, we hope the Ferengi find you as tasty as their last associates. Are you suggesting the Ferengi eat him? This is a weird episode. Up on the ship, Riker wants to find Data. We get that scene of him interacting with the first version of the Enterprise D computer, which leads him to the holodeck. And actually, there's some things here in this scene which are good to remember about the holodeck. For example, they have a full discussion about how a lot of the stuff in this holodeck is real, using it a little bit like the technology for the transporters. They don't mention the replicators, but you can imagine it's kind of similar, which helps explain something in a moment. But this whole scene, of course, gets alluded to in a big way a couple of times later on. But it's also, there's some bits that don't age well. For example, Data graduated class of 78. Which 78 was that? If this episode is set in like 2366? Or at least 2360, it's somewhere between 2364 and 2366. So, all right, Data's a time traveler then. And Data does an awful lot of smiling in this scene, which is really creepy. They were really figuring Data out here in the beginning. We get the wobbly rock, we get Pop Goes the Weasel, and we get Data's first assurance that he would give all of this up if he could be human, which leads to Riker calling him Pinocchio. We have a down, and the down is specifically for the remaster. So down, Spiner's stunt double looks absolutely nothing like him. Wesley comes in and shouts to alert the two of them, but he wobbles on a rock and falls straight into the creek, and Data very heroically jumps down to save him and lifts him up and does another creepy smile. Yeah, it looks nothing like him. We walk out, and of course you have the whole thing of, why is Wesley still wet? They did it. They covered it. They literally said much of what is in here is real. Taken up for covering your bases there. We get a little shot then of this sort of temporary sickbay, because we know it's not going to be the long-term sickbay, but it's kind of like little semi-office that's in there. I quite like that. And Wesley maybe is a little bit insistent, but he really wants to see the bridge. It's a nice enough scene that I'm gonna give him a pass. He's a kid. He's a kid and he's excited. As long as they just don't put a kid in every episode and have him saving huge things. Down on the planet, you've got Geordi, you've got Yar, you've got Data, and you've got Troi. They are there trying to investigate the station, trying to figure out what's going on. Troi gets pretty roundly rejected by Riker here. It's pretty awkward, if I'm honest. Yeah, she says, perhaps you and I. Yeah, anyway, so Troi, you go off with somebody else there, and I'm gonna go with Data, and I'll call you. It's pretty uncomfortable, I'm not gonna lie. We also have an example of Data using a contraction in this episode. He says, I can't. No. I mean, it's not down, but like, consistency with your character. Yeah, and we get the scene where, you know, they signal Riker, and he's like, okay, open your mind, and we get some pain, despair. We do get a weird thing from Geordi though. He's looking at it, using his visor, using all of his basically his powers, if you like, and he's like, it's a metal I'm not familiar with, and one I've never even heard of. You pretty much covered that with the first one there, mate. That's a down from me. We get the scene on where Wesley's on the bridge, and, you know, Picard straight away is like, what the hell? No children on the bridge. I didn't actually recall that he didn't know them as well now. That he had met Wesley, but Wesley was so small, he didn't immediately recognize him. And when Crusher appears on the bridge, he hadn't had a chance to see Crusher yet as well. So yeah, straight away, I mean, you get that sense that they know each other, but it's been a while. There is then the beginnings of a nice scene. The music cue is quite nice and bouncy. Picard says, I knew your father. Would you like to have a look around the bridge? And actually, taken up initially, Wesley starts to show that he does quite know the mechanics of this bridge, but when he accidentally identifies something approaching, Picard kind of freaks out. It's like, yeah, get the hell off my bridge. Yeah, right, chill out, mate, chill out. So I will say, up for letting him sit in the chair, and for his collection of amazing jumpers, but also down for Picard's reaction here. That was well over the top. A ship is coming in. Picard signals down going, do you know anything about this, Zorn? No, you mentioned the Ferengi Alliance. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it, mate. Not that a Marauder can't do damage, but I still wouldn't be too worried about it. Worf then does say it's 12 times their diameter, so it's kind of like one of the big city ships from Independence Day. I was watching this and I couldn't help thinking, Gene Roddenberry loves to dwarf his ships, doesn't he? I mean, I look at this against that, and then I think of the Enterprise against V'ger. Communications are shut off with the away team, so they start to chuck it on their way toward the Bandai City, which is what this new being or ship in orbit starts firing on. Again, we get another pretty awkward moment where Riker's about to go and Troi says, no, if you should be hurt. And everyone in fairness turns and goes, ah, come on now. Yeah, I was a down. But Riker and Data go off to see what they can see, and they see the Bandy City having the tar beaten out of it. Groppler Zorn sends a distress call to the Enterprise, and Picard says, "Tune that down." Down? Okay, I mean, like, I get you don't like him very much. Then you have Picard signals Riker and says, "Would you be opposed to a bit of clearly illegal kidnapping?" Riker's like, "Yeah, sign me up, mate." They're playing a bit fast and loose with the Prime Directive in this episode. Q does step in to stop them firing phasers on that other creature, and that's an important note to remember as well. For all of the divilment that follows in this episode, where he tries to goad them, he does stop them from firing. Down on the planet, Riker and Data are, well, thankfully they're not hit by the weapon's fire, but part of the building around them collapses. So they're knocked on the ground, but you know, they're grand. Riker dusts himself off. Data has core strength that I will never possess, taken up for that sit-up. They go in, and Groppler Zorn, look, I get it, he's a bit of a dick, but like Riker's full on like, "Well, I'll leave you to it then, bye." What is going on with this proposed alliance? Anyway, Zorn is beamed away in what looks more like a vaporization beam than a transporter beam, but there's no more reason for them to stay there, so yeah, Riker and Data back up to the ship. Troi is now sensing deep satisfaction, so something has clearly changed. Riker is all for beaming over to the other ship, after Q throws in a little just teaser about, "I will leave if perhaps this one gives me some entertainment." Oh, that is something that they will return to. I did like, however, "Temper, mon capitan." Up. No one says it quite like John Delancey. Q does say that Riker shows some promise before he disappears, and Picard says, "Well, at least you impressed him, number one." There is a very strange... There's a scene that, to be honest, feels like it was edited into the wrong part of this episode. You get this, you know, the alien ship's firing at the Bandy, Groppler Zorn's been kidnapped, Q has got a massive countdown timer going on, so Picard stops everything to go and make sure he welcomes Crusher to the ship and apologise. Down, not for apologising, but for where this scene is placed, because there's no urgency and there's nothing that suggests he's just come from the bridge from an emergency. It honestly feels like it was edited in later on. I also, you know, I would consider approving a transfer for you. And there's the rev she requested her position on the Enterprise D. He's like, "I'm just trying to be considerate of your feelings." No, it's a down. Yeah, it's a little bit too get off my ship. No matter what way you want to paste it. And again, also, why are we having this conversation now? We do not have time for this. An away mission goes over to the ship where they discover Groppler Zorn in what is effectively their version of an agonizer. Riker and Data fire their phasers, which shuts down this beam. Meanwhile, back on the Enterprise D, Q is doing his absolute best to goad Picard into attacking the ship. I like that, you know, Picard gives the order to yank the team back over. Q is stopping any communications among the ship, and Picard says, "I'll do whatever you say," just as the team is beamed back. Q immediately takes credit for it, but Troi is like, "Nah, it wasn't him. That thing sent us back. And it's a creature." One of Q's goads is, "It's an unknown thing, you should attack." And Picard counters with, "If you had earned that uniform you were wearing, you'd know that the unknown is one of the reasons we're out here." Up. Very Star Trek. They're also starting to figure things out. Zorn says that they never meant any harm, as Picard figures out that Farpoint Station isn't a station, it's another one of those creatures. They realize that it's a type of creature that could convert energy into matter, and we get the revelation of that beautiful jellyfish taken up. Picard realizes that the one down on the planet is its mate, and the episode really focuses on Riker and Troi there for a moment. It's like, wow, if we didn't get it before, we get it now. Q at this point, I think, is just playing with them. It's like, could you stop getting everyone killed, please? I love the visual of the Enterprise firing the energy beam from the main phaser bank down to the planet. That's an up from me. So is the ascension of the other jellyfish up to the planet. That's an up from me too. Look, it's gorgeous. This whole scene is gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's aged well. It's been scrubbed up really, really nicely. And again, very, very Star Trek. As the beings hold paws and fly off together, Troi says, "I feel great joy and gratitude. Joy and gratitude." Thanks, Troi. Couldn't have figured that one out without you. Picard turns to Q and says, "Why do you use life forms as a form of entertainment?" He says, "Temper, temper," and he disappears off. You'll note they never reached a verdict in that trial, though. There was a weird one where they say the Bandi are going to rebuild the station. One wonders how? Yar, for the only time ever, is seen wearing a scant behind Picard, and Riker says, I wonder if all of our missions are going to be like this one. And Picard says, oh no, number one. I'm sure most will be much more interesting. Let's see what's out there. Engage. The credits roll up, whereas they normally just appear and disappear. Encounter Farpoint! Will you join me, please? At Temporal Observations. Still fits. We have a lot of eggs, obviously, in this episode that we call back to and are callbacks to. Like I mentioned, the original opening sequence of the original series is very much used as an inspiration for the opening sequence of this episode. Our producer Robert Justman was a big part of that as well, as is the reuse of the motion picture theme too, so it would go on to become so well known and so identified with the next generation. The elevator that's in engineering, this is obviously a holdover as well from the same type of elevator that was in the motion picture. Q himself, the name Q came from Janet Corton, who was the president of one of the fan clubs for Star Trek throughout the 70s and 80s as well, and had gotten to know Gene Roddenberry. So it was nice as well that there was this ode to the fans in the very name of this character. Worf's baldric in season 1 is actually a straight reuse of the baldric that was worn by John Colicos, who played Kor in the original series episode Errand of Mercy. And also, if you look closely, the emblem that's on Worf's baldric here for season 1 is the original Klingon emblem. We're more used to seeing the Troi point one that's, you know, from I think the movies onwards they've used that one. But no, that original emblem was on Worf's baldric for the entire first season. I mentioned earlier on, of course, Commander Deanna Troi being addressed by rank as opposed to her role on the ship. That turbolift that they use to get to the battle bridge is actually not used very often in Next Generation at all. So yeah, it's fun to see them use the emergency turboshaft in this one. Picard surrendering unconditionally to Q was, because this arrived before the Undiscovered Country did, I do wonder if that was something that they alluded to in Kirk's unconditional surrender to Gorkon's ship in that movie as well. Q says that their courtroom is set in 2079. Well, we will then learn that that means it's post First Contact by something like 15 or 16 years. That was interesting to include that there, and then also that we know we're going to call back to that later on. It also, basically, it's proof that this is a courtroom that's set post not only World War III, but post First Contact with the Vulcans. A good indication that no, things didn't change overnight. Tasha talks about growing up on a planet like this, which of course would be brought back in the episode Legacy with Turkana 4, and of course will be brought back again in Star Trek Section 31. Data using the voice patterns of other people. Well, for example, the episode Brothers, the big long Picard access code, which I will not attempt to remember here. But yes, Data using other people's voices is something that he would go on to do quite a bit. Lot of nods to Shakespeare here, which couldn't be not a reference to Patrick Stewart's pedigree of working with the RSC. O'Brien not seeming to notice where anyone has gone. I feel there's a deliberate nod to that in All Good Things as well, where Picard is the one moving through time. And he says, you know, set course, and O'Brien's like, set course to where, sir? The Hood, one of the great taxis of the Next Generation, with the, you know, Captain DeSoto in command as well. Wesley, of course, making reference to Picard brought home Jack Crusher's body. Well, that is something that will become very much a part of their story for the rest, really, of Star Trek, going up to and including Picard's 3rd season. The observation lounge has those gold Enterprises in the back there. Now, I've always loved these because they're just great models, but also it includes, it's not very clear in this episode, but it includes the original design of the Enterprise C by Andrew Probert as well, which was more of an obvious mix of the Excelsior and Galaxy class ships. They would be in use for the first 3 seasons of the Next Generation and would then be retired, but we would see it again in All Good Things. Picard says, you know, help me not to make an ass of myself. I'm not a family man. Well, okay, that's not going to age very well, is it? Jack Crusher wants a word. Admiral McCoy. Not the only original series crossover, certainly the first and one of the most emotionally impactful, but of course we would see Spock and Scotty as well during the Next Generation's run, with technically Chekhov, if you know, because Generations is a Next Generation movie, and of course Kirk too. That line, you treat her like a lady, she'll always bring you home, that is absolutely referenced in The Last Generation, the final episode of Star Trek Picard. We get many examples of Worf being denied here. Mr. Worf, do you want to blast a hole in the view screen? I will try and do better. Picard says that he was acting futilely. The Stargazer model is on show in Picard's ready room, and the fish Livingston, named for David Livingston, who directed quite a few episodes of Star Trek. The first use of the word Imzadi, which is Betazoid for beloved. The original plan for the Ferengi to be the main antagonists of Star Trek introduced here, quite hilarious. The forest and the river scene, well, pop goes the weasel, twice more. That would become very important because in Star Trek Nemesis, after Data is killed, Riker can't remember the tune that Data was trying to whistle, but in The Bounty, episode 6 of the third season of Star Trek Picard, it is by whistling the tune from Pop Goes the Weasel that they are able to gain access to the device that would eventually go on to be Data. We also get a shot of that scene where Riker, sans beard, walks over to meet Data for the first time, that footage being reused in that episode again. I don't know this for a fact, but Wesley falling into the creek, this is the year after Stand By Me, so if you're familiar with the film, you might also be thinking of leeches. Toward the back half of the episode, you get lots of things that will be picked on later on. For example, Riker being interesting to Q. Well, the very next episode we would see Q in would be Hide and Q, where Riker is offered the power of the Q, if he only wants to take it. It's interesting that the seeds are planted here. I'm sure this is well known at this stage, but the Next Generation transporter is just the original series transporter flipped upside down. Zorn is in a being that is very evocative of the Agonizer from the original series episode Mirror Mirror. The jellyfish creatures, well, these are directly referenced again in Star Trek Picard's third season in the episode No Win Scenario. It was lovely to see this particularly referenced back again because it is a beautiful scene of star creatures, which you don't get to see very often in Star Trek. Q does not reach a verdict. That becomes one of the defining characteristics of the story with Q, Picard, and the rest, particularly for All Good Things, but even into Star Trek Picard as well, and also Yarn Askant. That is everything for our retro ups and downs for Encounter at Farpoint. I will be fully honest with you, I enjoyed this episode an awful lot more going back through it. Nostalgia probably helps, I'm not going to lie. Next Generation would take a little while to find its feet, and particularly Troi. Everything there, it would take a while to really figure out what they wanted to do there as well. Riker is quite a bit gruffer and blunter in this first season, but even here in this episode, you can see the humor waiting to come out of Jonathan Frakes as well. They dialed down some of the humor with Brent Spiner, which I do think was for the better, but overall, it's not bad. It's not bad. It wouldn't be one I'd rewatch very often, but it was quite fun to do it on a bit of a special occasion. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for Encounter at Farpoint. We're going to go a little bit different next week, still with a pilot, but you're probably going like, are we not doing these in order at all? We're going to go back in time, and I would ask you to go with me beyond the farthest star. But until then, I have been Seán Ferrick and you've been watching TrekCulture. Thank you so much. Please make sure that you're following along on all the various socials. We're at TrekCultureYT on Instagram. I'm at Seán Ferrick and all of the usuals. You are awesome and wonderful. Please make sure that you're subscribing and please make sure that you're sharing these videos as well. That makes a huge, huge difference. We're also doing the ups and downs for Star Trek Con, so do check that out on our audio platforms as well. Until I see you again, look after yourself, live long and prosper, put peace and unity out into the world. I think we need it, and it only starts by one person being kind to another and continuing that on. Folks, thank you so much. You are awesome. You are wonderful. To our friends in the Sudan, in Congo, in Palestine, we only want peace. We only want an end to hostilities. Everyone, look after yourselves. Thanks very much.